Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and 7.1.5 has launched on live World of Warcraft. As we know, Frost got some huge buffs, so did Unholy, and it's actually going to change how our spec works as Frost, and of course our playstyle as Frost. So I'm going to be explaining in this video the different Frost breath specs that you could be using, and for what reason you are using them, because and different variations of this spec are going to be better for different reasons and, of course, different placement. So I'm going to go ahead and explain to you that, guys, because I've seen a lot of cookie cutter specs being claimed they're the best spec, which in turn doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it changes a lot just based on slight talents. One spec's better than another one in different areas. So let's go over that, guys.
It's who we are, it's what we do, we've come so far, and now we pay the price, so don't even cry. The world is breaking down, and I cannot leave the ground.
First off, we'll be covering the maximum burst breath spec. Now, if you've been watching me on the PTR, you know I've been testing this one out quite a bit as of yeah, as soon as it came out, really. So the level 56 talent's got to be Murderous Efficiency. They also buffed the proc chance on that, so it works a bit better. The 57 talent's going to be Freezing Fog, Avalanche, Gathering Storms, and Breath of Centric. Those are going to be your key things. As for the other talents, of course, Blinding Sleet or Winter's Coming you want to choose, or White Walker if you're doing some kind of PvP. But for maximum burst spec, what you're going to be doing with this spec is either inside Battlegrounds to pull out some insane AoE now burst, or you're going to be using this to blow up healers in some kind of TSG in Arena, because as you know, even people playing the consistency spec before the Remorseless Winter or Gathering Storms buff were actually running Gathering Storms and Avalanche to increase their major burst damage with the consistency spec. Well, as of course they've buffed up Breath of Sindragosa, this maximum burst spec is 10 times stronger, not 10 times, I'd say maybe 2 to 3 times stronger than the consistency spec when it comes to dealing maximum burst. So with this spec, it's mainly about blowing your cooldowns. Outside your major cooldowns, there's not much consistency, being that you're running Chill Streak and not Tundra Stalker, because Tundra Stalker is going to be one of your main consistent damages when it comes to PvP in any Frost spec, really. But since, of course, we're transferring over to Murderous Efficiency to pump more runes into Gathering Storms, which is going to be our major damage, and of course some of our major peak when it comes to consistent damage with this spec. So what we're going to do, of course, is we're going to be running Chill Streak with this spec to deal maximum pressure. Obviously, I'm on PvE dummies here, so we're not going to be able to do that. But with this spec, as you can see, you're going to come in on a target. It's with like any breath spec. You're going to go ahead and maximize your runing power. You're going to maximize on that. And then, of course, we're going to be using our Frost Breath macro that I made the other week, which is just extremely OP right now. Just ridiculously OP. And I've actually found a way to macro Chill Streak into it, which was kind of a confusing process. But I'll go ahead and control C this over to a new one so I can show you how to add Chill Streak into this for Arena. And that just makes actually another ability to proc, which is absolutely insane. And hitting him with like... literally hitting him with like 3 abilities at once to begin with, and then you're hitting him with obliterates as those 3 abilities are all capping, and then you hit him with Dragon 2. Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous what the burst can actually do right now, created with the right macro. Now, we got this here. Now, if you wanted to add in Chill Streak, what you'd have to do is actually delete one of the last obliterates, as you see here, and then on the other side of Breath of Sindragosa, you would add in Chill Streak. That will actually cause the ability in this macro to, of course, proc. Right when you use your major cooldowns in your breath, it'll throw out Chill Streak, so that starts bouncing as breath comes off, and of course you're throwing up Remorseless Winter. Since those don't share global cooldowns, you can basically use all 3 at once using the macro, which is just an absolutely insane amount of burst. We're talking if there's 2 targets, you are going to see people almost die instantaneously if you manage to, of course, get to the breath in any kind of double DPS situation. So keep that in mind if you want to actually change that breath macro. I'll go ahead and put the breath macro down below with a link to the video on that so you guys can learn that if you haven't learned that. But pretty much it's just like any other breath spec. With this spec, it's basically going to maximize your now damage so you don't, of course, get CC'd during the burst and end up losing breath, making you even weaker. So this breath is basically to make it so you don't lose your burst to anybody basically, because you're gonna come out really fast and it's gonna proc really fast. Like this is all your main damage right here off the opener. Of course, you want to throw in that Howling Blast proc and just go out with that damage as hard as you possibly can. Really, you just need to peak up as much runic power as fast as possible with this spec, and then of course unload on somebody as fast as possible. Now, I'll be doing, of course, videos very soon in Battlegrounds with this spec. Trying to maximize DPS. I'm thinking in Battlegrounds, we can hit some insane numbers. I can even think that we're going to top the 900k DPS we did with the consistency spec with this spec when it comes to multiple targets. Fairly easy. Now understand, guys, that you're going to be running on certain timers with this spec, which is like about a 2-minute cooldown with your breath. So it does have a bit longer cooldown session than the consistency spec. So keep that in mind when you're playing it. Next up, we're going to be talking about the PvE spec. This is going to be the single target PvE spec when it comes to playing, of course, Breath. Now, what we got here is Murderous Efficiency, Frozen Pulse, Avalanche, Gathering Storms, and Breath. Now, you notice the only thing that actually really changed was the level 57 talent, and since it's PvE, we don't have to worry about honor talents. Now, the level 57 talent is going to be Frozen Pulse. Now, you're probably wondering, why Frozen Pulse? Well, the reason being Frozen Pulse, because, of course, as I was talking about before, you're going to be dumping as much runes as possible into, of course, Gathering Storms, which is going to cause you to actually be more runic starved than you were with the consistency spec, spamming more Frost Strikes than Obliterates, because that's what's actually going to make this Breath spec stronger than the consistency spec in PvE is going to be the fact that even the consistency spec at the moment, if you're playing it, is going to be transferring over to Gathering Storms over, of course, Runic Attune for single target or AoE damage, because that is an insane buff. Even though it was only 5% per stack, it ends up being a 50% damage buff total for it, making the damage absolutely insane. Now, you're wondering, why are we using Frozen Pulse over Freezing Fog when it comes to PvE? Well, this spec, your consistency damage, like I said in the previous section of the PvP part, is your consistency comes from Gathering Storms, pumping as much runes as you can into Gathering Storms to bring up that consistency DPS over and over again. And of course, if you're rocking Frozen Pulse, as you're dumping runes as much as possible into this ability, you're going to be rune starved while you're doing it, and your Frozen Pulse is going to be activating while Gathering Storms is AoEing, and it's going to create an absolutely insane dot on somebody as you're DPSing on them. And, you know, I don't know why. I saw guides rocking Freezing Fog. Now, Freezing Fog may be okay for Mythic pluses, but I would still rock Frozen Pulse just to bring up that downtime. Otherwise, your DPS is going to hit lows lower than the consistency spec without running Frozen Pulse. Now, obviously, this is going to be like single target / raid DPS spec, I'm going to have to say. Probably the best single target out of them. I am going to have to do more testing, but this was the one I got out of my test that had the highest consistent damage. And, of course, it had such high burst damage that it actually raised your consistency up quite a bit every time you burst. Unlike the consistency spec, when you burst, it only raised it up, 20, 30k maybe if you were lucky. I mean, if you had like the extra strength bracers or something along those lines, it may be even more. And of course, with this spec, if you have like the legendary ring that gives you an extra stack of Empower rune weapon, it's going to be even more. Now, this I'd have to say is going to be the best single target spec. It's going to give you probably some of the most downtime when it comes to running Mythic Pluses. So if you're going to be running Mythic Pluses for PvE with the Breath spec, there's a few things that you can do to make it a little... Actually, truth be told, as I'm looking at this, for Mythic Pluses, the only thing I'd probably transfer over, but it's still a big if, because Gathering Storms is really, really powerful right now. So the difference between a Mythic Plus, I'd have to say, I'd probably go Frost Scythe, just for the base consistency of having the attack all the time instead of running on a 20-second cooldown, which is really going to bring up your down low rotation in Mythic Pluses, since most of the time you're AoE grinding in Mythic Pluses anyway. But of course, if you're running Frost Scythe, that'll probably bring down quite a bit of your single target damage when it comes to DPSing on your PvE spec. So obviously you're not going to want to do that when it comes to raid. Now, the other spec you can use this in PvE and or PvE, is going to be the consistency breath spec. Now, this is one of the cookie cutter specs I've seen some of the people come out with, and I'm going to explain why it's good and why it's not good, and of course why the other ones are going to be better. Now, when it comes to the original PvP spec, obviously the burst of that spec is going to be a lot higher than the consistency spec based on Avalanche, Freezing Fog, and of course if you want to add in Frozen Pulse. Now, what this spec is based around doing is elongating your breath spec to keep up the DPS for as long as possible. Now, one of the reasons it's not going to work nearly as good as it did previously is we're rocking Gathering Storm, since it is so powerful, over Runic Attune, which is actually going to cause gaps in your breath spec, and your breath is not going to be nearly as elongated as before it was previous patch if you're switching over these talents. But the breath, of course, the elongated breath spec is still going to be a fairly solid spec, because you can keep up breath for as long as possible. The only difference I'd have to say with this spec as the other ones is you, of course, got to pop Horn of Winter and Hungering Rune Weapon at the right times. Now, when are the right times to pop those? When you go in for your breath spec, you're going to, of course, use that awesome macro. I mean, it's an absolutely amazing macro. PvE, PvP, like, you should be rocking this thing. The first time you get a gap like right here is going to be when you use Horn of Winter, and that's going to be a gap closer. You know, you see how I made it to those extra runes to your next, of course, Hungering Rune Weapon, which you start spamming to generate a lot of runic power, which Hungering Rune Weapon was also buffed, so that's going to elongate it a little more. Now, sacrificing sacrificing some of the, of course, damages you saw for some consistency of bringing up the breath spec. Now, this spec is going to be fairly well for PvE, I'd have to say, since, of course, you are able to keep up your breath spec for very long. But the problem you see here is after I fall off, you're going to hit a huge wall of where your DPS, consistent DPS, as far as single target goes, is going to fall off hardcore. It's going to fall off really hard with this spec. Now, when it comes to your AoE, it's going to seem like AoE isn't as affected when it comes to PvE situations, being that you're still dumping runes into Gathering Storms to keep up your DPS when it comes to AoEing. But I still have to disagree with the fact that even outside of Burst, I probably wouldn't rock this spec inside Mythic Pluses or rating, but I am again gonna have to test it out as it just came out on live today, and I wanted to educate you guys on what specs I'm gonna be rocking in the near future on these videos, how I'm rocking these specs, and why I'm rocking these specs. But that's gonna be it for this video. I'm gonna go ahead and try to make some videos up of the Frost spec, and then if I got time, I may spend quite a few days focusing on the Frost spec before I go back to playing either Dark Souls or venturing more into Unholy. So we'll have to see about that, because I'm pretty excited to play this the breath specs. I'm pretty excited to play all the breath spec, because it's something I've been doing for years. I think I've been playing the breath spec since I believe it came out in early beta in Warlords of Draenor, and that was when I invented the first breath macro that was later copied by a guy that I assumed at the time wouldn't actually copy macros and post it at his own that he invented it. But I mean, he doesn't have a channel anymore, so I can't send like a massive hate wave his way. So yeah, it was Holy Bible. I mean, I couldn't imagine that he would steal somebody's information. Yeah. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Leave a like on it. Until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.
The edge of the hellfire.